Hi there. Welcome to the Inner Radiance podcast. I'm Vila Lucas, and my guest today is Eden Hirschberger. She is a life activation practitioner and a colleague of mine here in Colorado, and together we work to bring modern mystery school tools and modalities to people who are ready to receive more light in their lives. And our topic today is all about what it means to receive or resist the light. So we're going to get right to it. Hello, my dear.
I'm so excited about this topic.
Right? And what prompted this is I love this experience that we have. So we're here in sunny Colorado at the moment in the middle of winter, and the sunlight coming in is such a wonderful experience to just feel that. Feel it shining in and on the physical body, and it just is such a great metaphor for how do we respond when the light shines on us? Do we take it in? Do we drink it in? Or do we somehow resist it? That was my inspiration for our topic today.
I love it. The sunlight here is just incredible, and it is such a choice of the mind and the body to receive the light and to let it in and do its magic and do its work on our physical structure.
Absolutely. So, why don't we start by defining some terms? So I just was referring to sunlight, which of course is physical light. And when we're talking about, in this broader sense of receiving or resisting the light, it's not necessarily straight up physical light. Physical light can contain spiritual light, but what we're talking about here is more of that spiritual light of awareness, that spiritual light of positive frequencies. How else might you describe it, Eden?
I think when the spiritual light comes in, from my understanding of it, it just soothes and softens, and it's not abrasive. So it's like there's the physical light of what's coming in, and then there's the soft undertones of the spiritual light underneath the physical light, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. And so I think sometimes, when we talk about spiritual light, it has, like I said before, sort of a broader expression to it. And we tend to put other names or other descriptors with it, right? So we experience it as love, or we experience it as joy, or we experience it as contentment or peace. So all of those contain light, all of those experiences that we have. Sometimes people will refer to that list that I just described as emotions. I don't necessarily agree with that definition. That's a whole other topic, and one, of course, you and I, Eden, have had many conversations about, and that we'll probably bring here, to our discussion rooms and Inner Radiance Academy on Clubhouse in the future, is really understanding more about our emotional nature, what it really is, what emotions are, how they serve us. But for the moment, talking about love, peace, joy, those aren't necessarily straight up emotions. There may be an emotional component to how we experience it, but those are more like frequencies. Those are more like experiences that we have as humans of the light, of that spiritual light coming in, of that place of openness and flow, and where we can have this positive connection to ourselves, to the world around us, to the divine, to other people. Any thoughts or comments on any of that?
I'm smiling from ear to ear just thinking about the vastness of what you're describing, and you're totally nailing it.
Thanks. So let's dig in here to what this conversation piece is around it. So why in the world, so when we're talking about love, joy, peace, light, why wouldn't we receive those? Like, what in the world would ever make it such that we would resist? Because, so receiving, okay, so in order to receive, first of all, it has to be offered. Something has to be coming towards you in order to receive it. And the same is true for resisting. You can't really resist something that's not coming towards you. So, what is it that would make it such that we resist those energies, those frequencies, that kind of light coming towards us? What would you say?
I would say, just from my own personal experience, it's like limiting beliefs and different thought structures that prevent me from seeing that higher perspective of my situation, and things that are, in my mind structure that are preventing me from tapping into those higher frequencies and believing that I don't deserve those higher frequencies, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me, but I would love to like unpack it a little bit more. So
Cool.
let's make sure our listeners understand more about what you mean by that. So limiting beliefs, mind structures, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about, you know, lower self perspectives on things. So, maybe when I'm feeling triggered or anxious or something, it's like I don't have the capacity in myself to say, I deserve to get some joy right now. I'm so stuck in those mind structures of those limiting beliefs, of those constructs in myself that are so long standing that I can't even reach out for that light sometimes.
So this reminds me of the conversation we were having the other day about the negative ego, which
Hmm.
unfortunately we didn't record, but we'll get another round of it coming in soon. But so you mentioned the lower self. So in many spiritual traditions and in the system that you and I are both trained in, we have a very specific kind of way of understanding and talking about the lower self and the higher self, or what we might refer to as the personality side of us versus the individuality side of us, or the more human level experience of how we move through life, and the more divine experience that we have moving through life. So what can happen is when we get more stuck in that lower self perspective, in the more human level challenges and more human perspectives, versus really connecting into the spiritual side of who we are, which is our true divine nature. And so when we tap into that divine nature, that spiritual side of it, we see a different perspective, and that's where we can connect more easily to that light, to that experience of spiritual energy coming to us, and then translating into that experience of love and joy and peace, among other things. Those are just three possible ways of experiencing it. So
Yes,
what you're
totally.
saying, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think a piece of what you're speaking about too is like, I think the beautiful part about receiving is that you are choosing to receive something that is being offered. And that choice point isn't something that is easy to attain or like suss out, because it happens in such a fraction of a second. But when you are continuously making those decisions to be receiving that light, to be receiving that joy, to be present in the moment with those pieces, with that light, it gets easier.
Mm.
This battle against the negative ego, this battle against those constructs in our minds and those negative ego thoughts of, I don't deserve this. Why would I choose light when I'm feeling like poop? And, you know, it gets
so,
easier the more that you choose it.
so do you think it's always a matter of, I can just do it or not do it? I mean, is it that simple? Like I can choose to receive the light or not in a moment?
Hmm. I have like, five different things that come up at once and they're all conflicting. So no, I don't think it's as simple as yes or no, because you can be in so many different percentages of being deep in your negative ego and being in your anxiety or all those different things.
Right.
And, that light is still going to reach out to you and offer you light regardless of where you at on those percentages, but it's your capacity to say yes
Mm.
even when you're feeling like you don't deserve it. That I don't know. That's a hard one.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, do you remember in the dining room at our house that we used to live in Washington, where we had that chart, on the wall, and we had those diagrams that we were using with the kids that was about open heartedness or closed heartedness. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And we used it as a way to help the kids understand kind of their own state, like, and kind of do a self-assessment of where they were at in connecting and communicating with other family members or whoever happened to be there. And so we had, there was an open heart, and that meant it was open to connecting, open to having experiences with other people, and like, it was generally a good thing. And so then we created these equations. So an open heart So one person's open heart plus another person's open heart equals like an even bigger open-heartedness. Like we can
Mhm.
amplify one another's connection and flow of light really by our open-heartedness and what it means to come to another person with that kind of open heart. And then we made a distinction. Then we had, at first we were working with just open and closed, and then we realized that there was actually four different, I think at the end we came up with four different levels, I suppose, of openness or degrees or different hearts on our chart. And
Mhm.
so the next one down was a tender heart. And so that was like when somebody was, not feeling great. They were feeling a little edgy, feeling a little, sad, or feelings a little hurt, or just maybe tired or grumpy. And so they may or may not want to connect under those circumstances. And that's kind of where it's an individual's personal choice, or, just what they lean towards. And a tender heart, the way we assessed it in our little family meetings, was that a tender heart could pretty easily move into open-heartedness when connected with another open heart. So we had like a
Mhm.
tender heart plus an open heart generally equals an open heart. And then we also had like a tender heart plus a tender heart also tends to lead to an open heart. So it's like if somebody had a conflict, if the kids were fighting or somebody was not having a good time together, and they decided to come with their tender heart and connect with somebody else's tender heart, the result of that would lead to this open-heartedness. And then we identified that sometimes there's not that openness, like I don't want to connect. And that's where the closed heart would come in. And so then we actually had two kinds of closed hearts. We had the closed heart, just sort of a regular closed heart. And then we had a closed heart that was locked. And the locked meant it wasn't open to changing. And so the closed heart that was open to change, didn't have a little lock on it. It's like if a closed heart connected with a tender heart or an open heart, that it might then change from a closed heart to either a tender or an open heart. But a closed heart that was locked wasn't necessarily going to shift. And regardless of kind of what it came up with, right? So although we found that if we had a closed heart that was locked and it connected with an open heart, then it might move from a closed heart that was locked to just a closed heart that was not locked. And so kind of showed these degrees and with the formulas. And so we literally wrote out these equations with the little hearts and the signs that we had for them. And I feel like it was a beautiful illustration of exactly what we're talking about, because that open-heartedness is where that light can flow. And so in this example, we were talking about it from the perspective of interacting with family members. So it was more, interpersonal dynamics and really flowing light and love from us to each other. But I think the same is true from that perspective of like divine light and coming into, just being open to receive that connectedness to the flow of light from the universe, from God, from nature, or from somebody else, or from yourself. And so, I think, as you were saying, like I've got several responses to like, is it just that easy to receive or not receive? And I think, having that assessment of like, what heart space are you in? Are you in a closed heart space? Are you closed and locked? And, I think a lot of people walk around closed and locked these days, where it's just like there's so much stress, there's so much going on, and like I can't even open myself up to the possibility of something positive or something good or something peaceful coming to me, because I'm just on guard and I'm, in battle and I'm fighting against all these challenging situations, and therefore I'm not open to a different kind of experience. I think that that's kind of a helpful way to consider it, that closed and locked, we're closed and maybe open, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get open. So if you're
Mhm.
closed and, and willing to change, then doing the work to get yourself to the place where you could move through that tender space. Because the reason we tend to close down into that closed-hearted space is because there's been some kind of challenge, there's been some kind of wounding, there's been some pain, and we don't like to experience that tender-hearted space where we feel like, I just don't feel great, but I'm still open, versus just closing it all down and then there's nothing that can get in or get out. Or so yeah.
Totally. I love that you brought that back around because, you know, being a witness to your family and being somebody who has been really close with your kids, it has made such a difference to, when that chart was up, it was really nice to refer to and just like understand and kind of ask myself, even because it wasn't something that I was aware of like I was approaching this situation with a completely closed and locked heart. And like, to be able to meet your kids who can be in that open-hearted space, who can really just flow that light and like choose like, oh, I'm with these really safe people. Like I can let my guard down and open up and soften into this light and receiving it instead of just resisting it and not really even understanding that I was in that locked place, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, then we kind of come to the question of like, what is it that causes me to close down? What is it that causes me to close that heart space energy? And of course, for so many of us, it's just a defense mechanism. But I'm thinking about, we recently relocated from where we were living in Washington State, and now we're living in Colorado. And it's pandemic time, so it's not necessarily easy to go out and make connections with people. I recently went to an event where there was quite a lot of people, and it was interesting to sort of experience my level of openness and like how willing to be open am I. And I'm not really a crowds kind of person. I don't like big groups. I much prefer smaller groups, one-on-one conversations, that kind of thing. And so I wouldn't say that I was like, certainly wasn't closed and locked, but like as the time went by and like my system was getting overloaded with stimulus, and I was just sort of like, and it was an evening, and I wasn't used to being out at night much, in the winter, which is kind of funny that suddenly I'm sensitive to that kind of stuff in my older age. But the point is, like, I could feel myself shutting down more and more just because I was getting overloaded. I was like, I think I just would rather go, because I don't want to be here, in a place where there is a desire to be more open. And, the point was to sort of cultivate an openness and connection with other people. But I could tell that I wasn't going to be able to do that just because I was feeling overloaded. And so, my husband and I made the choice to, leave a little bit early. And then as we did, we actually ended up having a really beautiful connection and conversation with one of the facilitators that wanted to say goodbye to us. She knew it was our first time there. And so she came and chatted with us, and it was lovely. And it turns out she's, a neighbor, not too far. She does work that, is very complementary to the kinds of things that we're interested in, the kind of work that I do. And so it led to this very beautiful, open-hearted connection from the perspective of where I was honoring, like, oh, I feel myself starting to shut down. I want to honor, how I can stay in a more open flow. And so that's what we were doing. And in that we were, greeted with this beautiful opportunity to have a very open connection with somebody. So I think, there's a whole piece of the self-awareness that comes through this question of, am I open to receiving the flow of light, or am I resisting it in some way? And sometimes the resistance really is about just self protection. I wasn't in a bad space or upset about anything. It was just my system has that level of sensitivity that there's only so much I can take in before I need to just, chill out in order
Yeah,
to stay
totally.
open.
Well, and I love that you brought in the honoring piece because there is this deeper honoring of self when you can own that, like, hey, I'm in this closed space and like I'm open to connecting, but I also feel myself retreating further into that potential locked space. And, I don't want to go to that place because I do want to connect and that's what I came here for. And so, like, in that deeper honoring process, you were rewarded with the light by choosing your self preservation.
Yeah. And, I was listening to a conversation earlier today on Clubhouse, and, they were talking about frontliners in the pandemic. And there was somebody who was a self care specialist, and I really appreciated what he had to say about self care, because it really is more of a mindset. It really is more of a way of life. It's not like, oh, okay, I need to schedule this in or make it something that is an activity to do. That's not really the point. The point is that it's more about a way of understanding yourself, a way of relating to yourself, where you can keep yourself properly tuned. I like to use the example of being an instrument, and being an instrument of the divine, being in service to the greater good and to like the betterment of humanity. And when we can be an instrument for that light to flow through, we can amplify and share light and make the world a better place, right? But we have to be in that open flow. We have to be able to do that receiving through our being so that we can give and offer it to others through service. And so making sure we're taking care of ourselves and doing what's required to keep us properly tuned to be able to do that is really key. And so, very much is more of a mindset and a way of life than it is, specific activities to take.
That's such a great perspective to have on self care, because I feel like in mainstream media, self care is like, let's go get a mani pedi and go and like do this external stuff. When in reality, self care, it can be in those moments, but it's also in turning inward and really getting to ask yourself deeper questions and getting to, you know, I love the garden metaphor of like tend to your garden of softness and to your beauty and to your, your inner light. And sometimes that means going in and crying and having a fit. And sometimes it means going out for a walk and just getting out of the energy that you've been stuck in. But
Yeah.
self care can't be defined by one particular action or mode.
Yeah,
It's just living from that self care perspective.
absolutely. And I love um, how, so tying this back into what you were saying earlier about, that being in the lower self, or, choosing from that place of looking from that, like I don't deserve this, or like I can't receive light because there's something wrong with me, or I'm off, and
Mm.
it becomes a self-worth issue. And we don't necessarily always think about it that way. That's not always where it is in the top of our consciousness, but it's gonna show up at those surface layers, like just really being focused on the negative, or being entrenched in the challenges of the circumstances. So whether that is coming up as really intense, negative emotions, or really intense just perceptions from a mental place of the negativity of a situation, and then turning that back in on some of the self-judgment we might carry. And so, having an awareness of that entire cycle is a huge piece of the work. And that's, when we talk about self development, self care, self mastery, self regard, self respect, self love, all of this entire checking in and understanding these levels of how am I relating to myself in all of these different ways. And where is that helping me open to greater flow of light? And where is that closing me down?
Mm.
So, fair, like really simple concept, but at the same time, there's so much to it, and it really is pretty profound when it comes to how we can make those choices in the moment to moment, day in, day out of our daily lives.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful.
I think, one other thing to just speak to on the resisting part is, just where we also get attached to some of those negative ways of identifying ourselves. So you were talking earlier about the mindsets and the limiting beliefs. If you have a belief that it's not possible for me to be happy, or I'm not somebody who gets to have or experience love or peace, or any of that kind of underlying belief, when we go to those places and entrench ourselves there, right? We like to do that. As humans, we like to be attached to these places where we get entrenched in these ways of viewing ourselves. So, it's an attachment to that identity of like, and a lot of that's going to come through family of origin type stuff. That's going to come through collective consciousness. That's not necessarily something we've made for ourselves. So when we're dismantling those kinds of things, there is a huge piece of over time, working through those different layers and levels to understand that, yes, I am holding this belief somewhere inside of me that I'm not good enough, to have this kind of experience. Or, or a lot of times people will run across those when they're coming into the work of like abundance or prosperity mindset, and realizing they're hitting some kind of a roof. And so when they're hitting like a glass ceiling around like, oh, I don't believe that I'm good enough to make a certain amount of money or to have an experience of opening up a flow that would take me to a different, social economical level or, all this kind of thing. And so I think that's one of the places where people have that experience of running into limiting beliefs that are embedded in the identity that they don't even necessarily realize.
Okay, so we are going to pause our conversation right here as our time has come to a close for today. But we're going to pick up this topic in the part 2 of receiving and resisting the light. So there's so much more for us to say on this topic. Thank you so much for joining us, and tune in for part 2 with some other special guests.